There's a very mysterious passage in the 6th chapter of the Book of Genesis, which to most people sounds too fantastical to believe, but which was taken as a historical fact by a good number of ancient Israelites, including the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's have a look at the narrative itself, zooming in on the exact language used and what it meant to those who wrote it and those who first read it.
And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them as wives, whomever they chose. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown.
The first part of the passage is straightforward enough. The human population is growing, and our attention is drawn to the females, who are fair, says the Hebrew text. Next, we're introduced to the so-called sons of God. This single term has arguably been the source of more confusion as well as speculation about possible encounters with extraterrestrials than any other in all of biblical lore. Who exactly are the sons of God? An examination of the Hebrew leads to immediate dilemmas, since the word God in Hebrew, Elohim, can just as well be understood as gods. So might these be sons of the gods or lesser gods? Is this an early reference to paganism among the earliest Israelites that somehow slipped into the Bible? But there's another way to understand Elohim, not as supernatural beings, but as noblemen, and that's reflected in Jewish Orthodox translations to this day.
The sons of the nobles saw the daughters of men when they were beautifying themselves, and they took for themselves wives from whomever they chose.
With a little detective work from a textual sleuth, it's been theorized that the sons of God were nothing more than aristocratic rulers, who exercised autocratic power in marrying anyone they chose from the lower classes, the so-called daughters of men. According to this interpretation, there's nothing in the verse relating to any kind of entities, angelic or otherwise, from any other realm. But there's yet another interpretation of the verse, that it's about impure and unholy marital unions between two antithetical lines of biblical genealogy, the descendants of Seth, Genesis chapter 4, verse 26, and those of Cain, Genesis chapter 4, verse 11.
It could be that such interpretations amount to force-fitting the passage into an understanding that's more rational and not so mystical. But whichever option best suits the plain meaning of the narrative, it goes on to describe an even more mysterious group called the Nephilim. Who are the Nephilim? The English translator doesn't know what to do with this Hebrew term and just leaves it as is. Other versions render it as giants, a translation preferred by a text that never made it into the biblical canon, the Book of Enoch. Truth is, the plain meaning of the word is much less mystifying, going back to a simple Hebrew verb, nafal, meaning to fall. While some think of them as the fallen ones, it might be better to understand them as invaders or attackers, those who fall upon the innocent.
The text might well be hinting that the merging of ungodly lines of the human family led to a collapse of moral order, to barbarity filling the earth. They may have been heroes of old, and men of renown, but they were also brigands and men of violence. This in turn led to the condemnation and doom of all the world, through the great flood to come in the days of Noah.
But somewhere along the line, in the days of the biblical prophets, a cadre of metaphysical seers who organized themselves in pietistic secret cell groups or conventicles developed a different take on the ancient story. They were conditioned by their own particular brand of spirituality, coupled with what must have amounted to some kind of transcendental experience. It was likely they who were behind the non-canonical book called Enoch. A good deal of folklore about Enoch was already floating around in the form of several ancient anthologies. The Book of Enoch is the oldest and most important, consisting of over 100 chapters and surviving in a complete text in the Ethiopic language. The textual plot thickened when a number of previously unknown Aramaic texts about Enoch were recovered from the caves opposite the Dead Sea, which likely means that the ancient sect known as the Essenes considered it on the level of Holy Writ. 4 of the 5 sections of the Ethiopic anthology have surfaced among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The most intriguing of these is known as the Book of Giants. Consequently, we can piece together a detailed backstory regarding disobedient angels who cohabited with earthly women. Enoch, of course, lived before the great flood of Noah, at a time when human lifespans were a good deal longer. The oldest of all was Methuselah, who was said to have lived an incredible 969 years. His very name in Hebrew, Methushelach, is a prophecy, meaning, when he dies, it shall be sent. Sure enough, the year Methuselah died, the flood waters were sent. The visionary authors who fostered what we can call Enochic Judaism clearly believed that in that antediluvian age, angelic beings had regular interactions with earthly women who bore their children. They became so fixated on these acts of corruption that in their minds, this was the reason for the great Noachian deluge. It wasn't just that sin had proliferated on the earth. It was the offspring of these unholy unions who had to be obliterated.
And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children.
This isn't the book of Genesis anymore. It's the book of Enoch's elaboration on Genesis. There's no straddling the fence about who the sons of Elohim are. They're not noble aristocrats, nor are they descendants of godly Seth. They're angels. To remove any doubt, the text reiterates that they are children of heaven. They're supernatural, non-terrestrial agents involved in a lascivious conspiracy to betroth and to defile human women. It's equally their conspiratorial intent to interbreed with these women and spawn offspring. As the Enoch narrative continues, notice how the attention shifts from angels as children of heaven in general to a very specific otherworldly entity.
And Semjeza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty of a great sin.
A good deal of additional folklore would be related regarding Semjaza or Semyaza, and in the end, he and the Nephilim were said to have begotten giants of enormous stature, reaching 450 feet in height. The floodwaters to come would drown them all, and only one man and his family would survive. His name was Noah. Meanwhile, the backstory of the visionary authors of Enochic Judaism was only heating up.